Hello, and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest this week is Irene Muchemi-Ndiritu, author of Lucky Girl. She's also a graduate of the Columbia School of Journalism. Our host, of course, is Sri Srinivasan. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the executive producer of the show, and we're so glad that you are joining us today. Please like, please comment, please share, please retweet. And first of all, I'd like to thank everyone watching the replay of this show. You're probably one of the few people who are catching the very beginning of the show. We know that as people are joining and they're getting the link and getting the reminder, they may join a few minutes early, but it's all of our stalwart supporters who watch it later that get to see my opening. So thank you for that. We definitely want to welcome people as they join the show, but just so you know, we are really thrilled to have Irene join us today. She lives in South Africa, but she's from Kenya, and she's spent years living and working in the States. She's actually on a tour of the United States right now. Unfortunately, we missed her in New York, and she's lucky she missed the crazy rains that happened earlier this week. But she is joining us remotely, so we will be talking with her in just a moment. As I mentioned, please let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you're watching on Facebook, please make sure to press play on the video so that we can see your comments. Jonathan is joining us from the East Village. Jonathan, thank you as always for watching our show. Doug Levy is joining us from Northern California, up at 5:30 in the morning Pacific time. I know that it's something that Doug says he always does, but it always means a lot that someone is getting up this early and spending their morning hours with us. And I want to just offer a special shout out to Doug. I'm glad to see that you're doing better and that you're up and about, and that hopefully you will stay healthy going forward. Ellen is joining us from New York City and offers greetings from there. We have a guest, Wangechi Kagiri, and I apologize if I mispronounced that, watching from Nairobi, Kenya. We'll ask Irene if she knows Wangechi. Pradnya Haldapur is watching from Silver Spring, Maryland. Pradnya, thank you as always. Liz Saul is watching from Massachusetts. Liz, thank you for joining us. I don't know if you are a longtime viewer and first-time commenter, or if you're joining us just because it's Irene. Thank you. Thank you very much. Ken Fisher is joining us from Iowa, and Diane Stefani is joining us from Margate, New Jersey. Thank you, Diane. With that, let's bring on our host, Sri Srinivasan. Hi, Sri. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Great to be with all of you. Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. We have a great show today. Irene is fantastic. You're going to learn so much about her perspectives about the world, as well as, of course, what's going on. We're going to be reading the New York Times, the Sunday edition. We do this every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And we do this because we love newspapers. We love real news, not fake news. We want to fight misinformation, disinformation, and we can do that because you're all watching with us. And we want to thank our sponsors at MuckRack. Please check out MuckRack. They are such a wonderful supporter of our show, but also the premier way for communications professionals and journalists to interact. So if you're a journalist, get your free verified account at MuckRack. And if you're a PR professional, you of course know about MuckRack already. And if you'd like to be a sponsor too, write to me, sri@digimentors.group or neil@digimentors.group. And let's tell you about Digimentors. This is the company that Andrew Lee and I co-founded, and Neil is our VP of Comms and Events. And as you can see, we do digital marketing programs like this. We do strategic comms, including PR and other ways in which you can increase your digital footprint. And we do trainings and workshops, as well as staffing and recruiting. And I just want to say, I've been doing a new series of workshops in various countries and around the US called my Non-Scary Guide to AI. Non-Scary Guide to AI. If you're interested in that, let me know. We do it for schools and businesses and nonprofits, and it can be anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 hours. So let me know if you're interested in learning more about that. We have folks watching from all over. I see Joanne is watching from the Hudson Valley in New York. Thanks so much. Naomi says, is that the sun from the soggy Upper West Side? Of course, there was so much, it was like almost biblical level of flooding in parts of New York, and things cleared up pretty fast, but wasn't good. Jimmy's watching from North Carolina. If in fact that's Jimmy Carter, not the Jimmy Carter, another Jimmy Carter. And Stephen Kaplan's watching. Good morning from wonderful to be here. Hope everyone is well. Tell us how your Sunday's going, folks. Just chime in, tell us where you're watching from, what you're doing today, and what was the piece of news from this past week that was of most interest to you, and what are you looking forward to? As those of you who follow news in the United States, we almost had another government shutdown, and it was averted by just minutes. And the way they were able to do that is by removing Ukraine aid from the final budget package that was passed. Now, somebody coming in from the 1980s or 1990s would think it's a time, wouldn't believe that the headline would be that Republicans stopped aid in fighting the Russians. Like, it wouldn't make any sense. But that's the way we are right now, with the Republican Party hostage to the far, far right. I'm hopeful that there will be another opportunity to continue the very important aid to Ukraine at this moment. There is so much misinformation and disinformation just about that happening every day in the news. So let me show you what's in the paper, and then we're going to bring Irene on. We're just going to look at the front sections very quickly. You can see here the lead story is frenzied push by Congress ends fears of a shutdown. And with police scarce, security guards carry burden. This is a major problem in the US and in the big cities. Let's see what else is on the front page. Hey, there's an ad for the Met. And where I used to work as chief digital officer, homecoming brings mums as big as Texas. So that is an interesting headline. And there are a couple here caught in the fold. So let me see what that is. Long shuttered military bases are still toxic, and mosquito wars, climate breeds deadlier threat. So that's all we need with everything going on in the world. Deadlier mosquitoes are coming too. So that's another worry that we have. Let's see, the Sunday business cover is the taboo subject of women's health. And this is about new brands that figured out how to talk about feminine hygiene, but are they still capitalizing on old stigmas? That should be a fascinating cover story. And the Metropolitan section, an instant home in a distant land. One of the things we're going to talk to Irene about is what's it like to be someone who lives in a country that's not your own. She grew up in Kenya, but lives in South Africa, worked in the United States, and I have some experience having grown up around the world, 7 countries in my first 18 years as a child of a diplomat, what it's like to live in different places. The Arts and Leisure cover has a great headline. I told you I'm teaching workshops on art, not on art, on AI. I should not be teaching workshops on art. It says, AI is an expert at making bad art. Great, great headline. Can an artist teach it to make good work? So we're going to read about that. There's the guide. Thank you, Neil. As you can see, when I used to teach it, this is how Irene will remember me. I had hair and computers look like that. And now I don't have hair as I'm teaching. That, by the way, is at the Southern Poverty Law Center. It's very important to me that the very first workshop that I teach on AI be at a meaningful place. And our this organization we get to work with, the Southern Poverty Law Center, was the very first time I did it. Thank you, Neil, and everyone. Just get in touch if you'd like to learn more about the classes. All right, the Sunday opinion cover is: do you have to be a Nazi to collect Nazi memorabilia? What a fascinating question. The market for relics from the Third Reich is huge, lucrative, and very disturbing. What do you think about any of these things? Jump in to the quotes and to the comment section and let us know what you think. We just have a couple of more sections to show you. From Manhattan to the Moon is a story about rental units continue to expand in metropolitan areas. Unless you're well off, you may be out of luck. And NASA is in the real estate business. So real estate from Manhattan to the Moon. And the last three sections to show you. The Sunday Styles is Gwyneth Paltrow on 15 years of Goop. And that's the company that she founded that has been accused of doing lots of damage to women's health and women's self-esteem and peddling lots of problematic products. I hope it is a tough interview and tough profile. The book review is Hurting Words, and this is about Larry McMurtry's A Life. Tracy Daugherty's new biography is the first comprehensive account of the prolific novelist. So that should be interesting in the cover in the book review. And here is the cover of the magazine. You can see it's certainly about a semi-automatic or automatic rifle here. And it says, could lawsuits against gun companies help stop mass shootings? I would like to think the answer is yes, but we know in this country where we are with the power of the gun companies and the gun lobby. So with that, we are going to bring in Irene to talk to us, and we will read the paper with her in just a moment. Folks, our guest is Irene Muchemi-Ndiritu, who is an author and journalist. She released her debut novel, Lucky Girl, earlier this year. So please welcome Irene.
Hi, Sri. Sri, I think you're muted. Oh, God.
Irene, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry that we lost Sri's audio.
Yeah.
Where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Boston.
Boston. So tell us a little bit about your time here in the States. You came here, we first connected several months ago when your book came out, and you had a planned trip to the States. You were here on a book tour, correct?
Well, a little bit of a book tour for a debut author. It's not a big to do, but it's something. And we were supposed to be in New York last Friday, I think so. Yeah, September 29th. But then there was this huge flood, and things don't always work out. But I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's good, and we're glad you could join us as well. We have several more guests that have joined us so far. Our friend Stefan Kaplan is joining, saying wonderful to be here. Hope everyone is well. Diana is watching from the San Francisco Bay Area. So we have several people, Irene, who wake up early California time to join our show to watch.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. We have Seshu Badrinath joining, saying hello to Sri. Been up delivering headshot portraits to his clients. That's great. Looking forward to the read-along. Thank you so much for joining this morning. Our friend Dr. Tachi is watching on YouTube from Fort Lauderdale. Dr. Tachi, thank you as always. And thank you again for joining us. Let's see if we can bring Sri back on. Sri, how's your audio?
Yes, hello.
There we go, great.
Thank you. Irene, I'm so happy that you're here with us, and we're going to learn so much from you. So tell us where you are this morning and where you are.
Yeah, she told us about her book tour, that she's in Boston now and that she was here. She missed the rains in New York, which was good. but we definitely, I mean, the book came out in, was it April? Earlier this year?
It was May
Spring?
2nd.
May 2nd.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
So let's start
Great.
with the book. Tell us about the novel.
Okay. The novel is actually a coming of age. We actually got the numbers quite recently, and apparently it sold about 10,000 copies or more in 3 months. So for a debut, that's not bad, I think,
No, not at all. That's very good.
Anyway, the book is a coming of age. It's about a woman who obviously grows up in Kenya with a very conservative mother, very wealthy, economically privileged family, but the mom is a widow, and so she becomes some sort of tiger mom, and she just puts all her energies, and she's quite dominating, and Soila cannot wait to leave Kenya and go to college in the States. And so the book is set in New York primarily, and it's just about, an immigrant, and how, you get to a country where you don't know anything, and you have all these stereotypes, and you have all these biases, and then as you live there longer and longer, they all start to sort of disappear, because you learn so much more about the people, and all these other things that she wasn't prepared for. She's Kenyan, and race has never been an issue for her. Everybody is black in Kenya, black and Indian anyway. So when she comes here, and racism is actually a thing, and she just really struggles with that, and she says, this is the first time I'm actually understanding that I'm black. Nobody ever called me black before. Nobody ever called me a minority before. And so it's such a shock for her. So that's what the book is about. It's about an immigrant. It's about racism. It's a mother-daughter story, and so much more.
And of course, the question everybody will ask is, how much of it is autobiographical?
And it is not, but it is some lived experiences with me. Obviously, being in the States quite young, I came here for college, and I stayed a while. And then I also went back to Africa, because my husband and I thought it would be cool to raise our kids in Africa at least. And then when they were older, they could come back to the States. And so now they're back. 2 of them are back, and 1 is still with us in South Africa. So, it's been quite a ride, but I feel like a citizen of the world. People ask me, so where are you from? And I always struggle to say Kenya, because I really don't feel, Sri, I'm sure you have the same experience. I feel like I'm just a citizen of the world, and that's a good thing, I think.
Sure. I was born in Tokyo and then moved on from there. So you can imagine feeling out of place started when the day I was born. It's so amazing to hear that you have children that are that old now, going to college and other places academically. Because I remember when I felt you were so young and just getting started. It tells you something about how old I've become, but also how quickly time flies. And we met at Columbia Journalism School. Tell us your journey on how you got there.
By the way, I don't know if you remember, I was the youngest.
Yes.
And I was the most clueless, because I had never worked. I'd never worked as a journalist.
So you're not the most clueless. There's always somebody more clueless than everybody.
There was nobody that was more clueless than me, I can assure you. Everybody was like really smart, and they had also like worked in the field, and and I came in and I was fresh from undergrad, and I really struggled. But I have some memories, for example, of how we used to have to read the New York Times on Sundays, and we would kind of get grilled on Monday morning. And I remember writing the theses, which was kind of like like a mini or like a novella.
Mm-hmm.
And mine was so
project, yeah,
and mine was so crazy. It was about a woman who had lost all her 3 sons to gun violence, and just being out in the Bronx. I mean, it was crazy, and covering welfare, and just seeing, like, you come in from Africa and you think America is a really wealthy country, and then to see poverty, and to see people that are living, on grants and paycheck to paycheck. It was such a shock. But the thing about Columbia for the journalism school is you learn you don't learn in class, as you well know. You get a beat, and my beat was Jamaica, Queens. And, it was just like so scary, because you're like a reporter. You're not really a reporter, you're a student. And so, but it was, it was great. And I will never forget my experience. And I would still tell people, if you can go, it's pretty much unaffordable. But yeah, if you can, you should go. It's great.
Yeah. So remind me of the year you graduated. You came in. Which fall was that?
I graduated class of 2000.
So 99 is when you came, and that was, of
Yes.
course, so much going on in America. This was
Yes.
before 9/11, but that turn of the century feeling, and a lot of things that we thought would happen may not have happened, and things we never expected did happen. So as you look, if you can think back to that moment and project forward, like how do you look back now after all these years?
First of all, can I remind you that we were the first year that did, we were calling it new media.
Yeah.
But it was, do you remember that? But it was actually what we know now as news on the internet.
Yeah.
But it was so different back then. It was like, I can't even believe how much, how far we've gone with new media, quote unquote. So my journey from there really was, I worked in the US for a bit, and then had kids, stayed home for a little bit, and then been in Africa, and then I decided, you know what, I want to write a book. And I'd wanted to write a book for a long time, but I didn't have the courage, and I always thought, I've seen so many people that they never break through. They kind of don't know what they're doing. They write a book for 10 years and they didn't want to do that. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to learn how to write creative writing. And I did. University of Cape Town, which is a fabulous program, by the way. Took about a year after the program to write a book. And I was quite lucky because within another year of that, I had an agent, which is like, it was like a miracle. I had a literary agent out of Europe. And then about 6 months after I got my agent, I got a book deal from Penguin Random House in New York. So, I don't know, it's a combination of luck and maybe hard work, but I think there's a huge element of luck because there's some really brilliant authors and who do a fantastic writing, but they still haven't been able to break through, so it's a crapshoot, I think.
Yeah, well, don't underestimate the amount of work it took and hard work it took to be successful. But you're right, luck plays an enormous role in how books are received, and where it hits and where they land is really important. Here's Dr. Tachi, who has a great show. She's saying, "Welcome, Irene, and thanks for sharing your story." I'm so glad she's watching with us. And folks, this is Irene and I'm Sri, and we are going to read the New York Times together. And we're going to also hear her story about being born in Kenya, living in America, living in South Africa, and what are some of the lessons and what it's like to be a citizen of the world, as she calls herself, which I love, which I also like to think that I am. And I'm curious about the state of higher education costs in South Africa. You got a master's degree there. How much roughly did it cost for you to get?
Look, you cannot even compare with education in the US. It's like the US is like becoming truly unaffordable, I think. But in South Africa, they have what's called FAFSA, and FAFSA is basically a government loan. It's student loans. So for kids that are not able to pay upfront, they can access student loans. And there's also a lot of possibilities for scholarship. In my first year, I got a scholarship from, I want to say, Ford Foundation. And then the second year, I paid upfront. So there's lots of opportunities for Africans, actually. They get a lot of support from, corporates, from big development companies and trust funds. But if you really cannot afford to go to school, you will go to school with the government money. You'll be fine. And it is way not as expensive as the US. It is expensive in South Africa. It's a privilege. Education is a privilege that is not, unfortunately, afforded to everyone. But it is nowhere near the US, not even close.
Look at Joanne watching on LinkedIn. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and on Digimentors.group. And people can watch live or later. And if you're watching later, thank you for watching later as well. Joanne, thanks for watching on LinkedIn. Sudha Parekh is watching. Sudha is Neil's mom, our executive producer's mom. Thank you, Sudha Auntie, for always being such a great supporter and being there for us. Everyone, if you're watching right now, tag somebody who's interested in the news, who's interested in the world, and they can watch either now or later. And please hit share on all of those platforms, or retweet, repost if you can. And Irene, I don't know if you had a chance to share it with your own audience. So when you have a moment, if you have your phone, you can just hit reshare on Facebook if you can. But otherwise, don't worry, you'll do it afterwards. So let's look at the paper. Tell me about your relationship with print newspapers these days. We had Sam Friedman, the famous professor at Columbia who teaches book writing, last week. He was sitting here eating bagels with me and talking about the news. And by the way, I know you wanted a cinnamon raisin bagel from New York, so we could do that. That was the plan for us.
It's such a pity. It's such a pity.
You'll come back another time and we'll get that bagel.
Yeah.
And he says, so this is a former New York Times columnist, somebody who teaches at Columbia, loves journalism, of course, is teaching and taught thousands of journalists. And he said he gets most of his New York Times in the phone format or on iPad. He does subscribe to the weekend edition. But tell us about your relationship with newspapers in print.
Can I tell you that I haven't held a print paper in, I don't even know, in such a long time. And I'll tell you something else. When we got the New York Times book review, I said to the publisher, can you please do you have a print copy? I want to keep it as a souvenir. And they were like, we really don't. So it's not just me. It's like people just don't buy the paper anymore because why? It's like so much better online, because it's just so much more, I feel, interactive. It's bizarre. I mean, I was in Kenya the other day. My parents still read the print paper. And it was just so odd. I don't know how people do this, but it's so odd, like flipping over and, some people prefer that, and that's okay,
Well, we're about to do that. I'll tell you that I love print, and, getting all these, this is just one day's worth of newspapers in New York. And there are, of course, environmental and other concerns. Imagine all these trees being chopped down and everything else. But you also know the realities of the economics of newspapers, that people are willing to pay more for this than they are for digital, and the ads are also higher priced. So this is going to continue until, of course, enough people stop subscribing, and that's going to be the change that we will see. So let's talk. So you're going to get a chance to kind of flip it virtually with me as we look at the paper. So you live in South Africa, in Cape Town. One of the things that I remember when I went to Kenya for the first time, where there is in Nairobi, as you know, a fair amount of crime. Violent crime in some cases, just like there are in New York, and there are thousands of murders. This was in '95 when I went. There was like the peak of the murder waves in New York, and I remember being told when I was leaving, be careful in Nairobi. But when I got there, people are like, "Oh my God, you live in New York? It's so dangerous." So the understanding of crime is where it depends on what you know of the world. And before you answer that, I'm just going to say, Ellen says, oh no, it's so much better not so much better online. I need the paper. I had digital during COVID, but thankfully have gone back to print.
Okay. That's great.
So you were going to tell me about how you think about like this perception of crime and things, because I also want to ask you about perception of government and governing. As you know, also in the United States, there's a perception that so many parts of Africa have the military coups, have all kinds of issues with governance. And you're in a country where, as you visited today in Boston, that last night by minutes, we avoided shutting down the government.
I know.
America looks dysfunctional, I'm sure, to you.
I'm not sure it looks dysfunctional, but Sri, do you remember when I was at Columbia, I got mugged at gunpoint? I don't know if you remember that. Did you know that?
Now I remember. Yeah, I'm sure it's coming back to me.
And the funniest thing was we had just finished what they call the ride-along. with the
Yes.
police.
Yes.
It was so ironic. And then I was walking back to International House and I got mugged. And I always tell people, South Africa has a high crime rate, unfortunately, because of the big income gap. I think South Africa is either first or second in the world for the massive income gap, obviously because of apartheid. So there's crime, especially in Johannesburg, not so much Cape Town. And I always tell people, listen, this is everywhere in the world. This isn't unique to SA. I was mugged in New York, of all places. So what do Africans think about the US being dysfunctional? I think there's a lot of obviously broad understanding. South Africans maybe wouldn't know so much about the government being shut down or almost being shut down this last week, unless they were really interested in global news. But overall, I think most people just don't understand America anymore. I think since the Trump years, it's kind of changed a lot, in terms of like what people consider freedoms and what people consider. I was just saying to Neil, please don't tell Sri not to ask me about anything political because I don't want to lose my papers. I still want to visit the US. So, it's changed, and it's definitely more difficult to understand, or people are wondering what happened to sort of America, the land of the free. It's people are now like not sure they want to go to the States, or if they go, they want to go for a week and leave. But it is what it is. I personally understand America, so I don't have to follow the sensationalism. Everything is always sensationalized by the media. So yeah.
So that was the lead story, as you about the shutdown was here.
Yeah.
Was Kevin McCarthy, whose own party caused that. And as I was saying earlier, if you missed it, I was saying that that Republicans are against fighting the Russians is a complete change from the 80s and 90s about where Russians stood, about where Republicans stood about the evil empire, which is what Putin is trying to rebuild, of course. We also want to look at, this is, again, the story of crime. And here there are fewer police, and therefore in big cities, you're seeing security guards carrying the burden.
That was a brilliant story. Brilliant.
Yeah, and this is about Michael Bach, a security guard in Portland, Oregon, checking to see if a man is overdosing. Patrolling the streets has taken its toll. And imagine not being a police officer and being forced to do this. It's really, really difficult. Here's a story about a long shuttered military bases, not just in the US, of course, but around the world. America has military bases in many places, or had them, and they're still problematic. And mosquito wars. Climate breeds deadlier threat. Those of us from the developing world have very strong associations with mosquitoes, and we don't want deadlier mosquitoes. In India, for example, it's every day a problem. And then homecoming brings mums as big as Texas. Cheerleaders at a pep rally adorned with mums down to their shins. So these are mums, not mothers, but mums as they call them here. So that's what you're seeing on the screen. And there's that ad for the Met. And before we move into the paper, I just want to tell everyone who's new, and I know we have a lot of new people watching today, that the reason we do this in part, apart from our love for newspapers and everything else, is that Neil Parekh here saw me doing this and jumped in to help several years ago. We've been doing this for 8 years. And part of the reason he did it is a very personal reason, and I'm going to give him the opportunity to tell the story. I often tell it here, but today has a very special connection to him and why we read the print New York Times.
Thanks, Sri. Appreciate it. And I want to go back to my mom watching from Hastings and to say hi to her. Irene, I don't think we had, I had mentioned this to you earlier. Our repeat viewers know the story, but my father was a longtime reader of the New York Times, and I grew up in New York getting the blue bag in our driveway every day. He passed away 14 years ago. Actually, today is the anniversary of his passing, October 1st.
Wow.
The significance of that is that when he died, one of his wishes, he wanted to be cremated, as is a tradition in the Hindu faith, but he wanted to include a copy of the Sunday New York Times in the casket with him. It's something that is very meaningful to me. Grew up with. I mean, it was just a mainstay. It's an image that I carry with me of my father reading the paper in the living room, and I grew up reading it as well. And one of the things that I've been able to do through the read along, we've hosted so many legends from the New York Times, people that I grew up reading their bylines, and to be connected with that every day. And I'll share with folks that it's not always easy waking up early on a Sunday morning to do the final prep for the show. It's not always easy in terms of getting the announcements out and doing the booking and the research and the prep work, etc. But every week when we do the show, every week when we go through the paper and we talk with our guests, I am reminded as to why I'm doing it and how much I enjoy it. So today is special. As I mentioned, it's the anniversary of my father's passing. So, Mom, just want to let you know that we're thinking of you today. And Jonathan is asking that this is the anniversary of the read along. It's in fact it's 8 years. I think it's in mid-October is the exact date. We kind of celebrate the whole month, but it's been 8 years since Sri started the show, and I joined him about 6.5 years later. My mom is reminding us that my father and mother both are Columbia graduate school graduates. My father did his MBA there after getting an MBA from India. My mom did her MSW from Columbia back in 71 and 73, respectively. So with that, I just wanted to share that on this special day. So Sri, thank you for that opportunity to keep that a part of our show. It does mean a lot to me.
Thank you. That's why we are able to continue to do this, right? We all need something that pushes us. And Uncle, who I knew better than I knew you, in fact, before I knew you and better than I knew you, he was a great supporter of the South Asian Journalists Association, which I co-founded. It's the 30th anniversary next year of Saja, and I'm so grateful for the wisdom and advice and just being there that Prakash, Parekh, and others were doing for us. By the way, I did not call him uncle because he was a colleague, right? He was a peer at that time, of course, much more senior.
Yeah.
But now I call him uncle
Sure.
because of you and because of Auntie. So
I knew your parents before I knew you as well. That's exactly. A story for another day.
Yeah, and Ravi says is applauding you, Neil, and saying thanks. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Irene, for bearing with us as we did a little personal stuff in there. And let's continue with the paper. We're going to take a look at what else is in the newspaper. And this has, of course, changed since your days here, Irene, when you were forced to read this for the Monday quiz. There's so much has changed. But here is the Inside the Times inspiration for the vegetable curious. That's interesting. The vegetable curious, and here we have here to help. Want to thrive first, learn to fail, and this is one of the things that has changed, Irene. Is there's so much kind of service journalism in the New York Times, including Wirecutter and all these sections that are more consumer journalism than ever before. A headline from history: Haiti's military assumes power after troops arrest the president. This was 1991. I remember that story. And we are just going to flip through. And please jump in, Irene, if there's anything catches your eye on any story that you would like to comment on. You're welcome. In a region of conflict, a model for peace most of the time. This is an Israel dispatch of when you live here, being racist is unnatural. The fact that you're growing up together makes a huge difference. This is, I guess, about a village where there is most peace most of the time in Neve Shalom, also known as Wahat al-Salam in Israel. So I'm very curious about the story and want to learn more about it. And left a spiritual dome open to all faiths and a village party. I had a beautiful childhood here, is what someone says. And here is the trendiest accessory in Niger, a Russian flag.
Oh my goodness.
Stylish sign of region's pro-military shift. Supporters of Niger's ruling junta unfurling a Russian flag during a protest against foreign interference, and left an anti-Macron demonstrators in Niger carrying a fake coffin draped in a French flag. And of course, the French and Russian flags at first glance look a little bit alike because they're both red, white, and blue. So any comment on that story you're welcome to make.
No, I don't have a comment. I didn't even realize that was happening. Maybe I should get the print paper because that's not on the digital today.
Yeah. So maybe you can talk a little bit about seeing kind of Russia and China spending money, energy, time, resources on the continent to help get more attention to their, to increase their influence and increase attention to their interests.
Actually, it's interesting because South Africa is just very mildly pro-Russia, just very mildly, because I don't know if you know, but during the apartheid, Russia was one of the countries that really, helped Black South Africans. So there's a bit of a, it's not really said, but there's a bit of a I don't know, some sort of like, they wouldn't mind to support, Russia, and that's okay. I mean, as far as China, Africans don't really have good relations with China because China comes in and wants to do business. And some of the countries in Africa are actually going through like a second wave of colonialism, this time with China. So it's very complex, Shri. Yeah, it's very, very complex.
Sure, and we're not going to be able to get into all of that.
Exactly.
But it's still such an interesting perspective, and thank you for letting us know. We sometimes look at the ads in the New York Times. By the way, here's a story about uproar in data in UK over data push for heavier role in healthcare. And no surprise, this is Peter Thiel, the chairman of Palantir, the company. He is one of those deplorables who's doing so much damage in the world. He did a lot of damage with Facebook and then with Elon Musk, and just for perpetrating so much damage in the world. And so it's interesting that the ad next to a picture of Peter Thiel is, "Dear world leaders, regulate deep fakes. Mandatory watermarks or detectable patterns are recommended for all deep fake or artificially created content." And this is from the Institute Odem Rosenberg, which I don't know anything about, so I need to learn about them. They can afford a full page ad in the New York Times, and I'm curious about them. Anybody knows anything, let us know. But here's a full page ad. I think this is like minimum $75,000, especially in the Sunday edition. And here is a story about the Canadian-Indian divide. Modi policies fuel tension in Canada's Indian diaspora, killing spotlights, widening divisions. As you may know, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, has accused Indian government operatives of killing a Sikh leader who has been accused by India of fomenting terrorism in India as part of a movement for a new country called Khalistan, which goes back, the main crisis in India goes back to the 80s, but was shut down, after assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, an attack on the main temple of Sikhism because a terrorist was hiding in there. All kinds of things happened. But in India, you hear very little about Khalistan anymore, but you do in the diaspora in some quarters. Not, most Sikhs, almost all of them are not paying attention or don't care about this topic. But in the diaspora, in certain places, and folks are still very interested in that topic. But of course, there are also now Hindu extremists right-wing folks around the world. So it's a very interesting and difficult situation for folks to understand, and that's why it'll take a full-page article like this for people to read and understand that story. In the Maldives, voters elect ally of China their leader, and this is a story of someone who is anti-Indian and is an ally of China. And Maldives, as you know, is in that Indian Ocean sphere of influence of both India and China. Iraqis say wedding hall was built like a fire trap, and a tragic story of more than 119 people killed in Iraq in a wedding fire. And here's a story of mosquitoes. And older insecticides are no longer working in the fight against diseases carried by a highly adaptable pest, is the story here. And Tiny Insect Giant Menace. Articles in this series examine the growing health threat of mosquitoes and the urgent search for solutions. So this is not just one story and not just one 3-page story, but so much more. Day of unsung Ukrainian sniper, hiding and waiting to shoot. Numbers are small, but impact is huge. Look at this photograph. Look at the ink on this gentleman. It would take a sniper's bullet about 4 seconds to reach a target about a mile away. With a populist favorite, Slovakia's election could reverberate in Ukraine. And why this matters is that far-right parties, when they win, they support Russian interests and Putin's interests in and around Europe and elsewhere. Russia attacks region it considers its own years after illegal annexation in Ukraine. And for detained reporter's family, an agonizing wait. This is about Evan Gershovich's parents and waiting for their son Evan, who is still detained as a journalist, but he's been called a spy in a lie by Putin. Here's the national section. A year after Hurricane Ian, a beach town struggles to maintain its everyman vibe. This is Fort Myers Beach. Have you spent time in Florida?
No, apart from Miami for holiday, not really.
Okay. They helped write a research paper. Most of them wanted to be retracted. A scientist and a journal, again, facing scrutiny. This is Ranga P. Dias and 10 co-authors wrote in Nature that they had discovered a room temperature semiconductor, and now many of them want to retract that story. And so, when we think, Irene, that misinformation and disinformation, mistakes and things like that are on the internet that are just on there by either by mistake or on purpose, it also happens in scientific journals, which are peer reviewed, which is the amazing thing that we have to keep in mind. And that's how hard it is to fight incorrect information. The Peace Corps faces suit over policy of rejection. So this is a Peace Corps volunteer in Peru. A Peace Corps typically deploys 7,000 volunteers in 60 nations, according to recent figures. That should be an interesting story. And here the Nobel Prizes are coming this week, entire week, starting at 11:30 Central Time. Every morning this week, a different prize will be announced. On Friday is the Peace Prize. And so 11:30 in Stockholm will be 5:30 a.m. Eastern Time in New York and in Boston. So if you're up early, you can see the winners in those different fields. So every day this week and on Monday when they announce the economics Nobel. The reason I know so much about this is that in a strange and wonderful thing, I'm now on the board of Nobel Prize Outreach and working with them on various initiatives. And I'm so grateful, so lucky, so humbled to work with them. Here are all the prizes that are being announced. And so it'll be announced between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. Eastern Time all this week. And it starts with physiology or medicine, then physics, chemistry, literature, piecework, economics. I also want to say that Neil and I got to work together with the Nobel Peace Center in Oslo on this year's Nobel Peace Conference with 5 Nobel laureates. Neil was at his home producing the show, and I was co-hosting out of Oslo. It was a life highlight, as I like to say. Biden's plan to remove lead pipes hits bumps, And in COVID, fatigue remains a confounding symptom, and that's that long COVID. What has been your experience with COVID?
I did not get a dangerous bout of COVID, but I do have a friend who nearly died. In South Africa, it was pretty bad. But yeah, I've seen the ugly side of COVID. I'm very lucky. Did you get COVID?
I did. I got it once and hoping not to get it again, but I'm jabbed 4, maybe 5 times. I don't even remember, but I'm going to sign up for the new booster that is coming out. And now I'm old enough, Irene, that I qualify when, after the very first wave of the oldest people, I'm in the next group now. I can get it. So I'm definitely I'm going to get it. That'll be hopefully this week. With great numbers of abuse claims, Baltimore Archdiocese files for
Oh my goodness.
bankruptcy. And these are stories that were there when you were here. You remember the scandal in the Catholic Church, and now they're still, 20 years later.
That was
Still,
a story that I did for a newspaper in Boston. The story broke actually while I was working, and it was a fascinating. I mean, I interviewed some people. It was a crazy story, and I'm surprised it's still going. It's crazy.
Yeah, and that's the way things are. This is a story that we all remember from the summer when the Kansas City Star, a great newspaper, was raided by the police chief. And a lot of people in other countries said, look at this, America lecturing on freedom and press freedom and everything. Now that police chief is suspended, which is good news. And here's another story about security guards. And look at all the things that security guards have to do in America now. Very important story. And again, it continues here. So
is that the same story from the front
front page? Yeah,
oh, wow.
From the front page. Yeah,
okay.
And you can see how big that is. And Dianne Feinstein died. She is that senator who was 90 years old and wanted to continue. And there's a lot of talk of if there is a minimum age to become a candidate, why isn't there a maximum age for political candidates in political office? After a deluge, this is what it looked like here in New York. The city lurches back to life. And the obits. So Irene, I love reading obituaries. It's a little macabre in some ways, but I learn a lot. And we always look at the obituaries here. We want to tell everybody that Amy Padnani, who was obituaries editor of the New York Times, is going to be our guest in November. She was already a guest on this show, but we're going to meet her again because she's written a book about Overlooked, the series that she did about women and people of color who were ignored by the New York Times over the years for an obituary. And so we're going to get to see her. We're going to show you on the screen the Overlooked series. Since 1851, obituaries have been dominated by white men. We're now adding the stories of other remarkable people, women, men of color, etc., women of color, etc. Look at this. Ida B. Wells did not get an obituary in the New York Times. She did so much groundbreaking work. It's really scary. So many interesting people. China's Joan of Arc didn't get an obituary. Or Mary Ewing Outerbridge established what may have been America's first tennis court in the 1870s.
Wow.
So watch for that show. And then the great Diane Arbus, one of the most celebrated photographers of our era and hers, did not get an obituary in the New York Times. And that tells you the attitude and the lens through which the obituaries section and the newspapers of that time looked at the news. So let's get back here. Tim Conway, 71, leader of Steelworkers Union, who lent an ear to Biden. And we saw something this year we had never seen this week, Irene, when Joe Biden walked a picket line in support of the United Auto Workers Union. And Lucy Morgan, feared and revered Florida reporter, is dead at 82. Barbara Mullen, 96, beautiful, ugly face of 1950s fashion, dies. I've got to read to understand that particular quote about her. And the sports section. So are you a sports fan? And what kind of sports?
I don't know. That is one department that I know nothing about. I'm just clueless with sports.
All right. So then we will not waste our time looking through that, or your time looking through that. And the New York Times still has these very expensive ads for jewelry. that people have seen for years. And here's the taboo subject of women's health. And the question here is, new brands have figured out how to talk about feminine hygiene, but are they still capitalizing on old stigmas?
I love that story. I love
Yeah,
it.
Beatrice Dixon says, Beatrice Dixon started the Honey Pot Company in 2014 with a cleansing wash she created. The company's products are now sold in 30,000 stores in the United States.
That was a great story. For anybody that hasn't read it, it's a great
Okay,
story.
so this is so amazing that Irene has read so many of the stories already. I'm just picking up the stories here. And I missed this comment earlier from Naomi, who says, the New York Times obits are always finely written. And Naomi, it was great to meet you in person a few weeks ago. That was so much fun. A dishonesty expert is labeled a liar. Accusations of falsifying data harm a Harvard scientist and her field of study. This is about Francesca Gino, a prominent professor. So interesting. I was just in Stanford the other day, Irene, on Friday, where the president of of Stanford, a famous neuroscientist, resigned because of allegations of misconduct in his research. And that story was broken by a freshman working for the Stanford Daily newspaper. So that was,
Wow.
yeah. I mean, one thing when we say misinformation and disinformation, I always want to point out, and by the way, a writer's strike is over in the U.S.
Thank
in
God.
Hollywood. Yeah. So now we can get more of our shows that we all love so much. And I'll ask you in a little bit about your favorite TV and book recommendations, all of that stuff. But I just wanted to say that I will never forget that one of my most famous examples of misinformation and disinformation is from the Harvard Medical School in the 1960s, had an opportunity to choose to focus on fats or sugar as the problem in American diets and to warn about it and to focus America's attention. And because they got paid by the sugar industry, they focused on fats. So they lied and falsified data and focused on fats and not on sugar. And as you know, the rest of the story, America became, the most obese country, large country in the world because in part of the damage done by sugars and not enough attention being paid to the sugar industry and all the evil that it has done in our lives. So that's just a little bit of editorial there, Irene. The Lying Boss and Your Bottom Line. So lots of business stories here. And here's more on women's health brands. Finally talk about women's health. And a story about Gen Z's debt spending could derail the future. Interest rates, slow wage growth, and student loans contribute to the crunch. I know that when you were graduating, Irene, it's not like your generation of students felt so comfortable and everything was great money-wise. But now look at that. It seems like it's so much worse than when your class was graduating.
I mean, I don't know if you remember, but my year, the journalism program was $40,000 for the year, and now it's double that. So it's just unbelievable.
I mentioned earlier that I'm doing a bunch of workshops that I call my non-scary guide to AI. So if anyone's interested in that, contact me and I will tell you about our workshop. No audience is too big or too small. AI is an expert at making bad art. Can an artist teach it to make good work? And let me ask you about your relationship with AI, and there's so much noise around AI these days.
It's actually quite interesting. My son is so into it and he's doing data science. And so I'm learning more and more about that whole thing. But for the most part, I mean, I just find, this whole thing about, oh, AI will take over writing. And I'm like, no, it won't, because there's no way the AI can have creative ideas and all of that. I don't know. I just think, as far as my career and my sort of writing and all of that, I'm not very intimidated, I don't think. But I do think it's very cool.
Okay.
And by the way, I put in something like what is it? Lucky Girl. When was Lucky Girl by Irene Muchemi-Ndiritu written? And it didn't know. And that's because obviously it hasn't gotten that information yet. So it's quite interesting that
And
it
it is
needs.
getting that, by the way. The new edition of ChatGPT comes much closer, or maybe even current. So you're going to be in ChatGPT soon. That can be good and bad, so watch out. Let's see here. And Ron Thomas says that he's going to contact me for an AI workshop. Thank you, Ron. Ron's a great supporter of the show, great friend, lives in Dubai, has travels. You know, you think you travel a lot, Irene. He's in New Jersey and living in Dubai, who has clients all over the world. He's amazing. Lloyd Webber Productions Reimagined. Have you gotten? When was the last time you saw a musical or a play, as opposed to watching something on TV or
Um,
film?
I'm trying maybe a couple of years ago, but
Okay.
I don't even really remember.
Okay.
Actually, this time I was going to come to New York, and I actually wanted to go and see something, but with the writers' strike and then the floods, it was like, it's.
Yeah.
Do you go often?
When you live in New York, you don't go often enough, right? You think you're going to be on Broadway, watching Broadway shows
Right.
all the time, and it doesn't happen because life is too busy. We want to go more, but we don't get to. This Cape Crusader wore a bikini. The Batwoman featured an independent woman in an era of change in Mexico. So this is about, I guess, a Mexican Batwoman. In Dancer's Orbit, an artist formed a hybrid vision, picking up the maestro's baton about Leonard Bernstein. And here is TV for dogs or their people for $9 a month, for $10 a month. A channel offers videos to entertain pets home alone and educate humans to train them. This is so hilarious because our dog doesn't respond to anything digital.
My
Even-
dog
Yeah,
doesn't even understand the TV. You try to show him,
exactly.
and you're like, "That's another dog." Look, there's a dog, and he doesn't care. So I don't know what this story is about. I'm gonna have
Exactly.
to
No, I
read
do
more.
know dogs who watch TV. I know cats who watch TV, but our dog just doesn't respond to even my voice on the phone. She doesn't respond to. So anything digital, she doesn't even look at a mirror and see herself or bark at herself or anything. So might be for some people this might be great, and for some dogs, but who knows? I'd also like to just ask you about kind of American influence on culture around the world. How do you think about it? And what are things that we miss in America because we're so bound by Hollywood that you get to see in South Africa and elsewhere?
I don't think it's just South Africa. I think even when I was growing up, America was such a huge force of influence. I mean, I remember just the Cosby Show and it's Dallas and Dynasty, and all those shows. We would sit around and we would like, because there was no TiVo, there was no whatever you could record and come back later, like Netflix. So we would actually like be like, oh my God, Dallas is coming on. We would all sit around and watch Dallas. So and later, now I think with music and things like that in Africa, it's very much rap and all of that. So America has a huge influence in Africa, but it's also because of social media now, and people can see what America really looks like, the police brutality and all that. So I think people are moving away, or they're like not as warm to American influence, I think. But I mean, it's a huge America has a huge influence. I can't even pretend that it's crazy.
Sure. I will say that my cousin's little daughter, young, very young, she's only 10, in Kerala, India, has no interest in America. Everything for her is Korea because of BTS and those bands. And so
Sri,
I
don't get
told
me
her,
started, because I'm addicted and hooked on Korean dramas on Netflix.
oh my God. So
I'm
she's
hooked,
like
and
that. And
yeah. And by the way, a lot of people now are saying that they love the foreign film and the foreign series on Netflix and all these streaming companies. So people are becoming very much interested in foreign things, and
so
it's a small
non-American, you
world.
mean? Yeah,
It's just
non-American things. Yeah.
yeah,
And look at Kerry Washington has a book, Thicker Than Water. Speaking of
right,
Hollywood,
right.
she has a book as well. We've got a couple of folks checking in, and Mark Lee is watching from North Carolina. Says, "I don't want to think I forgot you." He was a regular viewer, and Mark says, "I say AI doesn't know human nuisances, but I hear people say that is on the way. Naomi is recommending a wonderful Broadway play, Jaja's African Braiding. Fabulous, she says. So I gotta check that out. And Mark is asking, what is the average cost of a Broadway play? That's the very important point, Mark, about the cost of these things. Can easily be upwards of $150 unless you're going, when you're still the best way, Irene, after all these years, two ways to get cheaper Broadway tickets. One is to go to todaytix.com app on your phone, or to go and stand at the TKTS line in Times Square, which is what you did and I did 20 years ago, and people are still doing that. All right. Speaking of Hollywood and bad influence, here's Gwyneth Paltrow, the actress and CEO of the lifestyle and wellness brand Hub, looks forward to her crone days. As we've said that Goop has done a lot of damage, but she says, I think people think I'm the figurehead, but I definitely operate the company. And so I don't know, is Goop something you're familiar with?
Yeah, I'm obviously familiar with Goop, and I will not say what I think about Goop on here because it's a little controversial, but no.
Okay, it's not going to affect your visa, but or your papers, so don't have to worry. The Modern Love column is always interesting, and we had the Modern Love column editor on our show, the creator of it, Daniel Jones, on Valentine's Day. It was so much fun. The best relationship that never happened. A woman at 50, divorced and delusional. A woman experiences the greatest love of her life. That should be interesting. And tiny love stories. Let me see if I can read this. So instead of reading the big one, which we can't, short one. The American woman sitting with us at a cafe in Capri did not see the smirks of the impeccably dressed Marcello Mastriani look-alike at the next table. She was middle-aged, frumpy, and a little overweight. They were in their mid-30s and slim. She said that hardly any of the passengers on a cruise ship came to Capri for the day trip. More smirks. I don't want to miss one museum, one piazza, one fountain, one enchanting place, she said. I want to experience it all. Love life. Drink it in. Otherwise, what's the point? The Italians smiled warmly. No more smirks. So a beautiful little love story about Italians. And, those Americans who go abroad are often, made fun of, as you know. Fabulous framing, but where are the big ideas? This is about Paris fashion, I'm sure. Okay, this is a part that I don't think Neil warned you about. We read the etiquette column, and I will ask you your opinion. There's no right or wrong answer, so you don't have to worry, all right? So this is Philip Galanza's really great column, and you may not be even familiar with this column if you don't find it online, but here it is. I go to cloth napkin restaurants with a married couple who are longtime friends. As a nearly 80-year-old woman, I reach the Kleenex up my sleeve stage of life. The problem, the husband of the couple blows his nose into cloth napkins. He's also in poor health. Should I keep giving him a pass despite the ick factor? So the question is, what do you think about people blowing their noses into cloth napkins at a fancy restaurant?
I think that's crazy, but I also hear from this story, it's an old person. So, with elderly, you give a pass, right?
All right. So you're very empathetic. That's good.
Yeah.
I recognize that you're grossed out, but I worry about the superciliousness of correcting another adult whose behavior doesn't truly affect you. You're not this man's mother or his mentor. You may certainly offer him a packet of tissues, but if he doesn't take the bait, let this go. So you also, I think, had the right approach to this. And we'll also just fast forward here. We also had one of the wedding section writers and editors with us a few months ago, which was so much fun. One of the things that has changed, Irene, since you were a student is how much more, folks who are here are more people of color, of backgrounds that aren't the rich that were featured in the society pages, as they used to call them. And of course, same-sex marriages is something that's new and that wasn't possible when you were here.
Did the editor tell you how they decide? Or I'm sure lots of people put in their stories.
Sure.
Did she tell you how do they pick what's going to run?
Yeah, I think maybe Neil can jump in if he remembers the details, but one of the things was that they look for interesting stories and not like who's child you are or what degrees you have, but what is the story? What will people remember? And Neil, what do you recall from
So
our interview?
I think from our conversation, with Kate Doty, I think it was, who had written for the vow section for a long time. What stuck out, what stands out for me is not so much the decision making around vows, but how it's evolved over time. That it used to be, as you were saying, Sri, it was I would call it the 1%,
Right.
people who were at the top of society, lineage from both sides, certainly both white, both Protestant, heterosexual couples. And we've seen that evolve over time, not only to include gay couples, but people of color and mixed marriages and more interesting weddings. I think that, I remember seeing there's some people who've gotten married in medieval fashion, for example, right? And that's the kind of thing you wouldn't have seen in the New York Times, in the old gray lady that we grew up with. I'm trying to remember whether it was gray when you were teaching, Sri, or whether they had shifted to color.
At some point they had color on a few pages, of course,
Right.
Over the course of my time there. But now you're seeing, look at this glorious color in
Yeah.
almost
So,
every page. Yeah.
so that's you can almost think of that as a metaphor for the way the Times has evolved once they started introducing color in the production of the newspaper. They started a little bit later introducing color into the wedding section.
I love that. I've not thought of it in that way, Neil. That's brilliant. I think there's an essay in there. I will say that it's time for us to revisit our friend Mike Connors at the New York Times
Yes.
printing plant,
Yes.
so that we can go back and do a read along, as we did one night, Irene. We went to the plant and he read the paper with me as it came off the press. It was like an amazing,
Wow.
amazing night, as you can imagine. So here's a question for you. Do you have to be a Nazi to collect Nazi memorabilia, or do you find people who collect, I'm sure there's a whole industry in South Africa of collecting things about apartheid era institutions and pictures and things like that. So what are your thoughts on this Nazi, or you can bring it to apartheid? What are your thoughts?
I don't think anybody should be collecting Nazi anything. But you know what? If it interests you, if it's part of your history, why not? It's, especially if it's part of your history, it's a good thing. You keep it and you show your next generation, your grandkids, like, it's what it was, or how, like,
how bad it was.
Let's not revisit history on this one. We don't want to ever go back to that.
Right.
I know, but I
like,
wouldn't personally.
What's it like with apartheid? I know there was a Trust and Reconciliation Commission and a different approach than America with slavery. As you know now, like, you can't even talk about slavery in many parts of America. They are burning books about it. It's so awful. What is the current situation in South Africa with both? Yeah.
I think it's not that long. It's, I think, what, 30 years next year. It's not that long. So it's very different, I think. There's definitely, people talk about it a lot, but there's also sort of a very sad divide, so the white generation of this era feel like, well, how is it my fault, and why am I getting punished? Why? So they have something called BEE, which is affirmative action. And so, it's like, why do I not get a job? Why do I not get into college? It wasn't my fault. And I think Germany also went through something like that at one point. So South Africa, it's very new. I was just telling somebody the other day that the new generation, they're called the born free, which is the child that was born after 1994, and those are the ones that are having a really hard time reconciling. Why do I not get the job? Why does this other person get the job? It wasn't my fault. I'm only like 25. I don't even. So it's tough, but I think that it's going to take a long time. That it's very raw and very it's a landmine. It's not something that is, especially as a foreigner, I definitely try to just keep away from all that, because I don't want to, say the wrong thing. Sure. Yeah, but I don't know. It's nothing like the US. It's just so new, How
quickly can someone tell you're not South
African? They can tell. they can tell quite quickly, especially when they greet you. You might know the greetings, but you still, they can tell immediately. They know. And there's some xenophobia in South Africa, and every now and again there'll be sort of eruptions of protests or whatever, and an immigrant will get killed or something like that, because they have so many migrants coming in from Zimbabwe, which, as you know, crashed, and Malawi, and all these. And so some of the South Africans feel like, wait, why are you now coming to get my job? It's tense. It's quite tense. It's an interesting country. It really is.
Yeah. No, I loved my visit to South Africa about 6 years ago. My best friend and co-founder of Digimentors, Andrew Lee, and I were there working at the Wikimania conference, and I got lost on Table Mountain in Cape Town, and almost didn't make it back. That's another story for another day.
Okay.
But Table Mountain is beautiful, and Cape Town is beautiful. So much to see. My children went surfing in Durban, and we got to meet Mahatma Gandhi's granddaughter, Ela Gandhi,
Wow.
in Durban, which was another life highlight. So South Africa has great meaning for me.
Yeah.
And my uncle was posted there as an Indian diplomat. So it's a very special and important place. And we hope that the anniversary next year, when they mark it, what is going to, the new attention that's going to come to the past. Not everybody wants to revisit it, as you said. So we're folks. Just to remind everyone, if you're just joining us, that's Irene Muchemi-Ndiritu, who is a former student at Columbia Journalism School, author of her debut novel, and someone who is with us. Oh, there's Neil has found my trip to South Africa. We went to Nairobi, Durban, and Cape Town, and Irene is now visiting America. She was supposed to have breakfast with me, but didn't because of the rains and other reasons she couldn't be here. But we're getting to have this great conversation. We have about 15 minutes with her, so we're going to speed through this a little bit, and I want to talk to her a little bit more about her work and her book, and then we're going to take a quick break to do some housekeeping, and we're going to come back to Irene at that point and ask her for a writing tip for everybody who's watching who wants to have a debut novel. She's going to give you her best writing tip in a few minutes, so stay tuned for that.
I don't know about all that. Okay.
Yeah, so here are some of the comments coming in. Let me just pull this up. Mark Lee says, folks say if you bring up slavery, you're guilt tripping. I think it's fair to study history, including the warts. Thank you for that. Mark also asked about the disabled and differently abled, how they're treated in the wedding section. I'm not familiar, Mark, and that's a good question. Parna says the nuance around migration, conflict in South Africa and within Africa is so worth exploring. And yes to Gandhi family's nonviolent communication work in South Africa and beyond. And Neil has linked to my Twitter thread about my trip to South Africa. And Mark says, what are your thoughts about relationships between African people and African Americans here in the U.S.? Yeah, let's explore that for a moment.
So,
if
yeah.
you can talk about it. You were here, as an African, and then you were dealing with African Americans, and how did you approach that?
So I don't know, Sri, if you're going to pick up my novel, but that is one of the themes, and one of the themes that's getting the most attention. I think the New York Times review talks about how race is the best part of the book. And so, and what I try to explore in the book is not so much about white and black, it's about black and black. Because when you come here as an African, like I did years and years ago, the first thing you notice is, gosh, we look the same, but we are so different. And so it takes a minute to just, as an African person, understand what is going on, and so you're dealing with this massive difference between two people that really look alike, that could be siblings, but also like the history, the history of the legacy of slavery and all that, and how that shapes a different kind of person from a person that grew up with maybe parents that went through. I mean, Shri, your parents, your grandparents went through the colonial years.
Yeah, of course. My dad too.
Yeah, so the parents and the grandparents are always very sort of more afraid and more tense around whiteness, whereas we, for example, don't have any, it's not a big thing until you come here, and then you see racism, and then you see how the Black Americans really get it so bad, and so in the beginning you don't really understand it, but then with time, you have lots of empathy, and you make lots and lots of Black American friends. But it's a huge learning curve for an African person in the US.
Yeah, and something that I think will continue to be as more people come from Africa to the United States. And at the moment, as you know, an African immigrant to America is doing much to ruin America in terms of Elon Musk, South African who has come here and has inflicted great damage to the United States while doing good things with some companies and hiring people and all of that. But the damage he's doing and continues to do with Twitter is of immense consequence. I remember writing in 2018 that Elon Musk should get off Twitter. I couldn't have predicted he would buy the damn thing
and name it
ruin
X.
Yeah, name it X and just ruin Twitter, and as a result, ruin the conversation, the toxicity, adding to the toxicity of America. Of course, Twitter was not perfect in any way before him. It's so many problems, but he now is in charge, and that's the problem. Dr. Tachi says there are definitely differences in socialization between Africans and African Americans, and this would be a wonderful topic for us to explore at a future time. I just want to show folks very quickly the magazine that the New York Times Magazine cover is about gun lawsuits and can they stop mass shootings. My answer is no, but I'd love to hear what she thinks of what are the gun laws in Africa like, in South Africa like, and I'd like to hear her thoughts. And the book review cover, and I'm sorry we don't have time to go into this, is about Larry McMurtry's life, Tracy Doherty's new biography, the first comprehensive account of the prolific novelist. Any thoughts on guns?
I mean, guns are problematic, and obviously, and the new generation African, the kids, the Gen Zs, because of social media, they are they're just not very warmed up to the US. And I have nieces that say, I don't want to go to the US. I'd rather, so but it's also sensationalized by the media, and so when I come here and I have to tell people, honestly, the guns are not around me. It's not that bad. It is bad, but it's not what I think foreigners are so, like in Europe and Africa. Everybody's like, my God, those guns, So with South Africa, gun laws are tight. You will rarely find somebody that owns a gun, or if they do, they're very discreet about it for crime reasons. But guns are not very popular. I think they're very criminal, so a criminal has guns, not so much me, Irene, keeping guns. It's not it's nothing like here. It's very different.
Yeah, well, just a quick glance at the book review. Harlem on Their Minds. Debut picture books by veteran storytellers celebrate the cultural history of a neighborhood. And I love this line. Langston Hughes could make the word Harlem sound like the perfect place to have a party. Beautiful. And by the way, Neil's mom, Sudha, says there's a similar experience when people coming from India to the United States. Many of the things you talked about, but I also see a divergence or some static between Indian Americans who have were born and brought up here, maybe 2 generations now, and Indians who just come here as immigrants themselves, the first generation. And the gulf there is much more than there has ever been. So that's also interesting. So as we start to wind up here, I want to talk to you a little bit more about. Yeah.
I'll just jump in on that point. I think that there's a universality to that that phenomena in terms of immigrants and residents and that clash. Every generation, when you've had a wave of immigrants come in, it's there's that tension. There are people who are there, who are in the country, who've established themselves, whether it's Irish immigrants, Italian immigrants. We're talking about Indian and African. Obviously, I think the African immigrant and the African American experience is unique in terms of the history of slavery, certainly. But there's always that sense of we've established ourselves here. We've become part of the community. Here are newcomers coming in fresh off the boat, regardless of the country. They're going to mess it up for us. They're going to bring back all the stereotypes, everything we've worked. And I'm not saying we as in me, but kind of in that voice, right?
No, in one of the most astonishing things is the number of conservative, right-wing Mexican Americans who are in Texas who make sure that they want the border closed and everything else. So people aren't monolithic, and that's one of the things we learn every day.
Can we get not get started on the right-wing conservative Indians that are out there, and the two people running for president? It should be a point of pride as the South Asian community, Indian community. We see two of our own running for president, but it's embarrassing.
Yeah,
and it's
these two are very embarrassing. Yep. Dr. Tachi says in the U.S., guns are a telltale sign of the fear of losing power. Beautiful comment there, Dr. Tachi. Thank you, everyone. Please check out our Instagram show. It is terrific. Maybe she will put her Instagram handle here so no one will miss it. And Parna says +1 to that. We were talking about that gap, Neil, just a moment ago.
Yeah.
We hear Roberta says, nice to see you. Thank you. And Mark is talking about law and order here in the U.S. Mark, we discussed it at length, what it was like for her and for her to come to America and look at violence and crime, and for me to go to Nairobi and to hear and see about crime. So as we're wrapping up here, talk a little bit more about your book. Tell us why everyone who's watching should pick up the book. And of course, it's available everywhere. And it's called Lucky Girl, Longing for Independence. A young, sheltered Kenyan woman flees the expectations of her mother for a life in New York City that challenges all her beliefs about race, love, and family. And it's also just important to note that this is about a wealthy a girl from Kenya who comes to the United States, and her relationship with her mother is also really important.
Yeah. I think obviously the biggest themes are race. And like I said, it's a different kind of way of looking at race. It's looking at people that are like you in a country, but are so different. And what that means, does it dissolve your biases that you carry when you get off the plane? You get off the plane and, you see poverty and all of that in the Black community, and it's not anything you've experienced, and so there's a lot of horrible biases that Africans who first come here carry. But with time, they learn the history, and they learn the social dynamics and all of that, and they start to realize, you know what, I get it. As far as mother-daughter, I think that's also been a huge theme. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, there was like a book festival in Cape Town, and I was on one of the panels that was mother-daughter and the damage that can be done by a mother. And I swear we had 150 people in the auditorium. And they were all women. There was about 4 men. And I just realized, wow, women really do have issues with their moms. And I suddenly hope that when my girls are older, we will be, we won't have as many issues, but who knows. And then the third theme is basically privilege. The idea that immigrants that come here can have money, and that they don't have to stay one day after they graduate. They graduate and the next day they're back home. They don't need to be immigrants. And even if they are immigrants, it's a very different thing from what immigration is supposed to look like. It's not, the broken English and the all the trauma from being brought in by coyotes. It doesn't, or the boats, it doesn't always have to be that. It can be, very well educated, the people that you work with in investment banking, in medicine, in law. And I think that we need to hear more about that kind of immigrant. And I was very intentional about making sure the protagonist was somebody that could, could relate and with people, middle class and upper income, and not feel intimidated, because she already has, privilege of her own. And so that's really those are the themes in the book. And please, you can pick it up. There's a review in the New York Times. And like I said to Sri, we have the numbers are in for the first 3 months, and it's 10,000 copies. And I think it's great because we didn't get any push from any of the book clubs. The book wasn't picked up by Oprah or Reese or Jenna, so it's really just done word of mouth. That's the power of word of mouth, honestly, and reviews. So by the way, if there's a book you love, any book you love, please, it's so important for the authors, go online after you read the book and just write a review, because it's really, really helpful for especially debut authors who haven't made their name yet, So yeah, that's it from me.
Sri, we need to unmute. Sorry.
We just want to just go over those names. Jenna, Oprah, everyone knows. Reese Witherspoon has a book club. Who knew? And Jenna is Jenna Bush Hager.
Yes, her book club is called Read with Jenna, and she comes on every month with these books that she sort of, it's really endorsement,
Yes,
and if
we gotta get you on there as well.
Well, it would be great, but I don't know. But that's what I'm saying. Like, if a book gets that stamp, you can understand why it sells. If a book that doesn't have that stamp, it's really word of mouth. And so my little lucky girl selling decently, with no, huge promotion, I think is great. And by the way, all authors coming up behind me need to know that literally it comes down to the focus on the book, focus on writing your book, focus on how do you connect with humans through your story. How do people relate? How will they relate? Because if they relate, they'll love the book. And then, everything else is a crapshoot. Like I said, there's horrible books on the New York Times bestselling list. And there's great, awesome books that, unless I tell you, have you read X? You would never know about this book. And so it's new writers need to know it's okay to not be on the book clubs and to be this and the other. Do your best work, relate, make sure your readers can relate, and then everything else is left to the universe. There's nothing you can do. It's luck. It's a crapshoot.
Now everyone can hear why I knew when we met Irene 23 years ago, her attitude, even though she was the youngest in the class, she just had this open mind and open attitude about everything and absorbed a lot. And you can see she's grown into an amazing, veteran journalist and now an author. And her attitude is so different from a lot of people who are very upset about not being on those things, and she understands the reality of the world, and a lot of that I'm sure has to do with her global upbringing. But those are great tips, but we're still going to come back to you to ask you for a writing tip. So you could tell us how you wrote your book, or just something about the writing aspect, which a lot of people struggle with. I can tell you myself, I love getting commissioned to write a story, and I love having written, but the in-between part I don't like. So we'll come back to you in just a moment. Neil, what a great show. We're going to talk for a moment of some housekeeping here between us and then bring Irene back. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Neil, your thoughts?
Absolutely. Sri, I think that it just shows the range of voices that we bring to this show and the experiences, and what it leads to some really interesting conversation and interesting points. And to have authors, to give them a forum. One of the things that we do is we give people time to talk about their work in a way that they don't get in other media on other platforms. I will say I'm continually jealous of the Columbia Journalism School alumni that get to come on the show. I get to live vicariously through them, so that's always fun as well. And how great was it to have a student from your very early years when it was new media, right? That was certainly great.
Back to back with Sam Friedman and our entire
last
archive,
week.
Folks, please go to digimentors.group and you can see all our archives there under programs, and of course on my Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And we have a whole series of great shows coming up. In fact, we wanted to book somebody and we couldn't find any openings till the end of December or something like that.
Yeah, I was going to say that our archives, you can go to digimentors.group/NYT read along, and you'll find all of our shows in one place. And we are booked for the rest of almost to the end of the year. We have some openings in December that we're trying to work through with some of our New York Times folks. We might be able to get Mike Connors on at the end of the year. But except for taking off for some of the holidays, next week, for example, will be Indigenous Peoples Day for the weekend. We'll take Sunday off, but we'll come back the weekend after that. Excuse me. Sorry, something's in my throat. And we'll have a great show. Jim Heaney will join us. He's the editor and executive director of Investigative Post, based in Buffalo, New York, focusing on watchdog journalism up in Buffalo. So there's an example. We also like to focus on local journalism when we can. And then, after that, except for like Diwali and Thanksgiving, we're going to keep going with some great guests, a mix of New York Times staffers and editors, and also other authors. And you mentioned Amy Padnani coming in November as well.
And Parna, we'll just review some quick notes before we bring Irene on and say goodbye. Parna says, mother-daughter dynamics are universal. Absolutely. Our ways of being determined by this key relationship. Sudha says, Irene, you gave a very good preview of your book. And Aparna says, trust that Columbia community and Columbia's publications and channels are sharing your book. And she didn't know that Jenna Bush had a book. And so here's an example of our media world right now, Neil, that Aparna, who is a devoted reader of news and consumer of news, didn't know that Jenna Bush has this book club on the Today Show, which tells you not anything about Aparna, but about the fragmented media landscape, that even the Today Show is not as big as it used to be. And I remember, by the way, that I would be sometimes on the Today Show when I was doing a lot of TV, and you would expect everybody in the world would have seen it, but sometimes people in my own house hadn't seen it. And that was a reality of media. Jonathan says, great show. Thank you, Jonathan, for watching. Great shows need great viewers, and Jonathan is one of them. Speaking of another great viewer is Naomi. Looking forward to your next show. And Dr. Tachi, who's still watching, says, I grew up partially in Buffalo. So
that's great.
That's great. And Dean says, it's really all a crapshoot sometimes for literary acclaim. You have to find your niche and keep plugging along regardless. Great advice.
And I want to acknowledge Dean. Go back. Dean, I don't remember commenting before, so it might be a first-time viewer, first-time commenter. But Dean, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, and Nikhil says that I wanted to say my dog is addicted to TV. When it's on, he always has one eye on the screen, and if an animal appears, he goes ballistic, jumping around and barking. And he's 14, so he has good eyes there, which is not our dog. And Dr. Tachi says, can't wait to read Irene's book. I'm sure Irene will be happy to see that. And so here are so many other comments coming in. And Mark is asking me to visit his Heritage Center next time on a visit to Durham. And so I will definitely do that. Let's bring Irene back to give us a writing tip that folks can use. And and then we will say goodbye. Thank you, everybody, for watching. A little extended show today because Irene's comments and everything are absolutely worth it. So over to you, Irene, and thank you very much again for being with us.
Okay. Writing tip is one nobody's going to like. It's called rewrite. Sri, I don't know if you're familiar with rewrites, but
oh, yes.
You just have to rewrite. And I tell people that on my iCloud, I probably have about over 20 copies of my novel. And I remember when I was in the creative writing program, we did a lot of Raymond Carver. And Raymond Carver is an American guy who was brilliant at short stories. And his short stories are minimalist. But in one sentence, he'll tell you 100 things you need to know about this story. So for me, and we were told that Raymond Carver would rewrite one short story about like 100 times, and I thought that is insane. What am I rewriting 100 times? But it is what it is, and you have to just know that the first draft is what you're just pounding out from your brain or your heart, and then after that it just has to be very technical and mechanical. And I will say, if you do get a publisher, especially an American publisher, you have to be prepared to do a lot of rewriting, and that's okay. It's horrible, but it is what it is, and it's what gives a really, really good book, a book that you can read through quickly. You don't have to think like, what is this story, and so yeah, that's my one tip, and it's not very popular, but it's probably the most important one. Thank you, Sri.
Thank you. I'm getting a text here. I like Irene. She's so full of life. And Sunday morning early is not easy for most people, but here you are. And I said I was going to ask you about the jewelry you're wearing on camera, so I'm going to ask you about that.
It's South African jewelry, and this is Maasai jewelry. This is actually the Maasai, traditional Maasai colors. And yeah, this is just basically a stone that's been curved out, and they make necklace and they make earrings, but I'm not wearing the earrings. Thank you for admiring my jewelry. Thank you. And thank you for admiring everything that's African about me. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, so I just want to show everyone, speaking of Maasai, this is a painting my mother made when she lived in Kenya of a Maasai herdsman and the cows, which are such a big part of Maasai culture and society.
Yeah, because they're nomads and they walk around with their cows everywhere they go.
And it's their currency, right? It's also their currency.
Mm-hmm. It's an asset.
Yeah, it's an asset. Mark says, amazing show as always. And Dr. Tachi says, you somehow you knew that I can't stand rewrites, which is why I can never be part of a TV writer's room, says Dr. Tachi. And Naomi says, as Anne Lamont says, in Bird by Bird, that is one word at a time. Great show. Beautiful painting, says Tachi. Thank you. And Aparna says, that's amazing. Thank you all for watching. And Neil.
And as a reminder for folks, if you joined us late, as soon as the show is over, in just within a minute, you'll be able to watch it from the beginning on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on our Digimentors website. Wherever you're watching from now, you'll be able to watch it and catch the early parts of the show. So I want to make sure folks heard that before we signed off.
Yeah, and also just show everybody that New York is still in one piece, though lots of flooding. That's the UN, Irene, right there, and the East River. It's kind of a beautiful day here in New York, and we're sorry you're not with us.
Aparna says this is a solid reason to be on Facebook and social media these days. I think that's high praise, Sri.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And Dr. Tachi says, thank you, Irene, Sri, Neil. Thank you, Dr. Tachi, watching on YouTube. Thank you very much. Okay, that's our show. Again, we will not have a show next week, but we will be back on October 15th. See you then.
Bye.